New York City FC, in case you were wondering, has signed 14-year-old homegrown player Maximo Carrizo as the youngest player in MLS history, younger than Axel, younger than Freddie Adu, younger than all of them. I want your thoughts right now. Just what do you think about the signing? What do you think?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but they signed him on his 14th birthday, right? I believe he was 14 years and 0 days when they signed him.
Yeah.
Which
it was like 14 years and a minute.
I believe is legitimately the youngest that you can possibly be to be signed to a pro contract, because I looked up on Google, I Googled what's the youngest age that you could be to start working, and they said 14. So I believe, in regards to New York labor laws, that they signed him as early as you possibly could. And at the end of the day, it's going to be nothing meaningful for a few years at least, and that's even at that point. We'll see if he's broken into the team at any point. But I'm not a fan of this. I just think it puts a lot of pressure on the 14-year-old to perform. It reminds me a lot of Freddie Adu. When Freddie Adu was getting a lot of the hype and he was incredibly young, he was doing some good things at that age. But I feel like, and then we all saw what obviously happened to him. I just feel like I can imagine myself as a 14-year-old and the amount of press that the signing would be getting, because it's not like, he's done anything on the field so far, but he's getting the press because of how young he is that they signed him. So I think there's pressure there already in the fact that like he's just getting a lot of press. I'd be curious to look into like how many of these signings actually pan out when they're like signed maybe younger than 16. How many of these guys actually make the team and play? But yeah, that's just my opinion on it. At the end of the day, I could really go either way. If I had to pick a side, I'd probably say I don't like it, but
So I just went and looked up pictures of this kid. You would need to do a lot to convince me that this kid is anything more than 100 pounds soaking wet. There's a picture of him sitting next to Maxime Chanot, and I swear to you, he looks like his kid. So here's my issue. This clearly has no impact on the first team. If it does, this kid is going to be folded in half. Like it's going to be dangerous for him to play. Like I don't think it's.
Oh yeah,
he's not like that Axel from RSO.
Regardless, imagine like Kendall Waston barreling down and runs into this kid. He would genuinely like be in some serious danger.
No, and that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, so here's the issue. This is a trend that you're going to start seeing over the next few years because of the MLS Next Pro League. This league is simply there to develop talent, but it's basically a place where you can consolidate all of the MLS like development teams and play them together, I guess. But top teams from all over the world are going to just be, they're going to pay for their scouts to live there, because what they're going to do is try and poach these players from these academy teams just because they want them to play in Europe. And to my understanding, because MLS Next is it's an affiliate, like it doesn't have anything really to do with the league itself. And I might be wrong here. I dove into it and I couldn't find a lot on it. But if a team like, let's say Red Bull 2 that moves into MLS Next, if that team goes out and sells a player, all the money goes back to the Red Bull 2. It's a separate entity. So basically, you're going to see these kids get signed at 14 years old in 0 days, just because MLS teams are going to want to make money off of it. if that makes sense. Basically, if they sell them from MLS Next to Bayern Munich, Red Bull gets no money unless there's some sort of handshake that I have not found any information on. But to my understanding, this is a completely separate entity. It's MLS with all of its entities, and then MLS Next is like its own Division 3 type of league. So now we're looking at teams going to be signing these kids from all over the place just simply so they can make money off a sale in 4 years. Because otherwise they're just going to poach them and say, go play for Bayern's academy. And, you know, you'll see more Weston McKinney's than you will Tyler Adams.
I feel like I would imagine if with a lot of these teams that are going to be in MLS Next Pro, they're going to have the same owners. Like Atlanta United 2 doesn't have a separate, I would imagine doesn't have a separate owner from Atlanta United. So at the end of the day, if Atlanta United 2 were to sell somebody to Europe and get like a good price for it, which I highly doubt is going to be the case because I would imagine MLS teams will poach the talent prior to Europe grabbing it. But if that were to happen, let's just say, I would imagine they would just take the money out of the entity, like Atlanta United 2, and then it all goes to it, most likely majority of it will go to the owner, in which case they can then reinvest in the MLS team as opposed to the MLS 2 team.
Well,
that would be my guess.
This kind of transitioned into my next point about thoughts on the MLS Pro League. MLS Pro, from all the research that I've done in the last 48 hours, is going to be basically an independent league for all intents and purposes. Players are owned by the clubs. They're not entities of the league, not like MLS where the contract belongs to the league. It belongs to the teams. So clubs should be benefiting 100% from player sales, which is what we talked about. Likewise, there's no salary cap. This is going to be a third division league for a bunch of academy kids. I don't think that's really going to matter too much. But you're going to see two things happen. You're going to watch for 5 years and see what not having a salary cap and what allowing clubs to be, or allowing players to be part of a club and not part of the league, what that's going to look like. And maybe MLS takes notes from that. But I'm very curious to see if there's some sort of handshake going on. So you can sell players from that MLS 2 or MLS Next, and you know the money will go to the owner, sure. But how are you allowed to reinvest that in MLS, right? So you can use it on your designated player slots, sure. But if you have all 3 of your DP slots filled, and now you sell a player from your MLS Next team, does that turn into Garber bucks? Right now, there's nothing that says that that's going to happen. So that's going to be a conversation for a future. But the other thing that I want to know about it is what's going to happen to some of the teams in USL Championship, right? Because you got your Red Bull 2 and your Atlanta 2, sure. But you've also got teams like, hold on one second. I had it here before. Loudoun United. Loudoun United is technically DC United 2, right? But it's its own separate team. Charleston Battery is probably going to be a feeder for Charlotte, right? But if teams are going to create their own number 2 teams, these teams are going to have to either rebrand to, you know, DC United 2 or whatever, or they're going to have to go find owners and basically start from the ground up again. So what I really think is going to happen is over the next 5 years, going to see a massive, drastic change in the American football landscape. Teams are going to start becoming either completely independent from MLS or completely tied to MLS, and there's going to be no in between. You're going to see creation of teams. You're going to see teams start folding. There are going to be lots of movement in these top 2 divisions to create this third division. There's no guaranteed security for some of those teams. From what I'm reading. Now, there could be more information that comes out in a couple months that ties into what MLS is going to do with MLS Next Pro. But from what I'm reading right now, this is the first, initial feeling that I'm getting.
I'd imagine there's probably, I would say this is a step that is probably a step in the right direction for these like MLS 2 teams, because I was just looking back at like the standings from the USL Championship last season, and pretty much all of the MLS 2 teams were like near the bottom, if not rock bottom.
Right.
All right, so I think this was a good move for MLS 2 teams because they really struggled in the USL Championship last year. And I'd imagine, I looked at the year before that as well. They don't really compete at the top level in the USL Championship. And, I guess that's pretty much expected because a lot of these MLS 2 teams have like pretty young players for the most part. And, they're going up against guys on like Louisville City who are borderline MLS talent and like in their prime. So I think this league gives them an opportunity to play on a more level playing field. I would imagine still though, if there's guys with high potential, like let's just say like a Justin Shea, I don't think he ends up in the MLS Next Pro League. I still think he ends up on like Dallas's academy, the MLS team, and works his way up through the academy. I would imagine that this is mostly going to be for players that get picked up maybe in like the draft or something, and just kind of testing him out, testing the waters, like seeing who plays well, who fits the system well. Like I know Red Bull does this with some of their players. They get guys, put them in Red Bull 2, kind of train them up and see which ones stick, which ones don't, and then they move them into the first team. But you're probably not going to see too many like budding superstars out of the Next Pro League, I would imagine. I would think that majority of those guys would be still with MLS academies as opposed to playing in that league.
It's an interesting take, and that's another one too, right? What is this really going to be? Are we going to turn this into, like, for example, Red Bull 2, a lot of their players will be signed to Red Bull 2, like Mandela Egbo had a contract with Red Bull, Jason Pendant contract with Red Bull, basically just playing in Red Bull 2. If it's going to be a separate entity, are they allowed to do that anymore? It's going to be lots of different things that come up here. But the last question I have for you on this is, what do you think this is going to mean for the way that MLS signings are, right? So right now you have a lot of people who are signing 2 MLS contracts, then being loaned out to the USL Championship teams. Does this change where if it's a separate entity and they're going to be brought up, that you sign them directly to a USL Championship team, and then they make a transfer up there?
I'd imagine the loans would still likely take place. I would think that guys who maybe they think aren't ready for the MLS level will get loaned out to their affiliate teams in MLS Next. But I would think in terms of signings, in terms of like looking at it as a separate entity for MLS Next, I would think it's mostly going to be guys that are undrafted, maybe in the draft coming out of college, guys that maybe got dropped from certain academy, probably not on the same level as like someone who's most likely going to break into MLS and maybe one day make a move into Europe. I'd imagine it's guys that have a bit more uncertainty to like their ceiling.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely something to watch for sure. MLS Next is definitely going to make a massive impact in the football structure in America. I mean, in North America in general, right, including Canada. But how that impact is handled will determine how big of a step forward that we can take as a league and as a football pyramid in general, right? So definitely something to keep an eye on. But I think you're going to see a lot more of these 14-year-olds on their way, which is kind of scary, but we'll see.